Welcome to True Crime Audio Pod, where we unravel the threads of the most disturbing true crime stories. Today's story is a chilling journey through the depths of betrayal among friends, a narrative that unfolds against the backdrop of jealousy and vengeance. It's a tale that reveals how the lives of several young people entwined in a tragic sequence of events that led to the untimely death of Michelle Avila. Missy Avila, a popular teenager from Arleta, a neighborhood located 15 miles northwest of Los Angeles, California, was preparing for an outing on the afternoon of Tuesday, October 1st, 1985. At 17 years old, Missy was known for her sociable nature and had experienced dating with several boys prior to the months leading up to her 18th birthday, a milestone she would, unfortunately, never reach. On that day, Missy made plans to visit a local park with her friend, 18-year-old Laura Doyle. This park was a common congregation spot for youths who enjoyed rock music, beer, and socializing. Missy dressed in dark blue jeans, a tan sweatshirt, and white slip-on shoes for the occasion. Before leaving, she consumed a sandwich and a glass of milk, and then met Laura at her door. The two exchanged brief conversations before departing together. Missy, ensuring she had her blue purse and black jacket, was inquired by her mother about the time she expected to return. With her departure time uncertain, Missy assured her mother, "If I'm not home by 8, I'll call you." Subsequently, Missy Avila bestowed a swift peck on her mother's cheek and bounded out the front door. Moments before she got into Laura Doyle's red Volkswagen, Missy pivoted towards her house, waved to her mother, and exclaimed, "I love you, Mom." The pair of teenagers then proceeded to drive off. 3 hours subsequent to their departure, at approximately 6 p.m., Missy's mother received a phone call. The caller was Laura Doyle, inquiring whether Missy had returned home. "No, I thought she was with you," responded Mrs. Avila, indicating a sense of confusion regarding her daughter's whereabouts. Laura Doyle clarified over the phone that she had left Missy at Branford Park. She was talking to two guys standing by a blue Camaro. "I had to go get some gas, but I wasn't gone more than 5 minutes. When I got back, she was gone and so were the guys. I thought maybe she went home." After ending the call, an unsettling feeling overtook Missy's mother. Nevertheless, she held on to the hope that Missy would adhere to her word and call at 8 o'clock. As time inched forward, each minute leading up to and then beyond the expected 8 p.m. call time felt increasingly agonizing. As time continued to drag on after the expected 8 p.m. phone call, the concern of Mrs. Avila intensified. When the clock struck 10 p.m., she could no longer remain seated in her home, racked with worry. Taking action, she traversed the few blocks to the residence of one of Missy's friends to inquire about her daughter's whereabouts. The friend, sensing the severity of the situation, offered to assist Mrs. Avila in the search for Missy. Their efforts continued through the night and into the following day. At 3 p.m., with no sign of her daughter, a distraught Mrs. Avila approached the local police to file a missing person report. Later, when questioned about the delay, she explained her belief in a presumed 24-hour waiting period before such a report could be made. The passing of time brought with it an escalation from concern to profound despair, as Wednesday and Thursday passed without any communication from Missy. The weight of uncertainty and dread grew heavier with each hour. Some 25 miles east of Arleta, Wickiup Creek meanders through a craggy canyon framed by the San Gabriel Mountains' steep escarpments within the Angeles National Forest. On Friday, October 4th, around noon, two hikers arrived at a secluded parking lot at the terminus of a serpentine dirt road and parked their car. They crossed the wood plank bridge that arched over the creek and proceeded to walk approximately 100 yards down the scenic trail beside the creek. As the pair navigated the creek, one hiker noticed an object upstream and alerted his companion, suggesting it resembled a human body. "Are you sure?" It looks more like some clothes floating, maybe snagged on branches. No, I think it's a body. Drawing nearer, the grim reality set in. It was indeed a human body, prone and partially submerged. The long hair of the deceased female floated in the water, and a large log was positioned over her shoulders, anchoring the upper portion of her body under the creek's surface. Reacting swiftly, the men retreated to their vehicle and drove to a nearby religious retreat to seek help. From there, a call was placed to the Monte Cristo station, the local Angeles National Forest Service office. The dispatcher, upon receiving the information, promptly informed the police and also contacted a forest officer, who hastened to the parking lot to meet the hikers. Upon the forest officer's arrival at the parking lot, 2 deputies from the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department joined the group. Together, they trekked down the trail leading to the grim site. The sight of the log holding down the girl's body in the water was enough indication for the officers to determine that the case was a homicide and that specialists from the homicide team should be called to the scene. Lieutenant Charles Elliott, with his partner Detective Melinda Hearne, and later joined by Detective Bill Patterson, arrived mid-afternoon. These 3, all members of the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department Homicide Bureau, came prepared to investigate the serious nature of the incident. With over 16 years of homicide investigation experience, Lieutenant Elliott was well aware of the importance of preserving the scene for the coroner's examination. While awaiting the coroner, he initiated a search of the area for potential evidence and instructed Detective Hearne to document the scene and the body with photographs. Detective Hearne, standing at 6 feet tall, brought 19 years of law enforcement experience, including 2 in the homicide unit, to the investigation. As a pioneer among women in the police force, she earned the respect of her male colleagues. In addition to her law enforcement expertise, Hearne was also a passionate photographer, which made her particularly suited to the task of capturing the crime scene details with her camera. Detective Hearne was handed a blue purse by one of her fellow detectives, which had been recovered by a Park Service officer near the scene. Although damp, the contents of the purse were still legible, allowing the detectives to identify the victim, Missy Avila. A notable detail was the absence of cash, leading investigators to consider robbery as a potential motive. As the sunlight waned, casting elongated shadows across the canyon, forensic investigator Brennan Bodley arrived. With a 16-year tenure as a forensic expert for Los Angeles County, Bodley took meticulous photographs of the scene and the body before any further disturbance. He then requested assistance from Lieutenant Elliott to remove the log pinning down the body. The 2 men, with Elliott at one end and Bodley at the other, lifted the substantial log, 4 feet in length, 1 foot in diameter, and over 100 pounds, off the victim. Once relieved of the log's weight, the victim's body floated to the surface of the water. Her left arm was contorted behind her back, her right hand lay at her hip, and her legs were crossed at the ankles. Following the relocation of the body to the bank, a more thorough examination took place. The deceased was a young female with long dark hair, fully clothed, wearing 1 gold hoop earring on an earlobe with its pair tangled in her hair, and a gold anklet on her left ankle. Bodley observed facial trauma, but he left the detailed forensic analysis to the medical examiner who would perform the subsequent autopsy. Detective Hearne's investigation of the surrounding area revealed it as a favored hangout, littered with the typical refuse of such spots, empty bottles, papers, and miscellaneous trash. The trees bore the markings of romance, scarred with the initials of couples. In her search for clues, Hearne collected a discarded beer bottle, though she was aware that recovering valuable fingerprints from it was unlikely. She continued to gather various pieces of potential evidence, securing them in envelopes for further analysis. Further investigation by the detectives led to the discovery of clumps of hair along the stream's banks, which upon examination, appeared to have been roughly cut from the victim's head, matching the hair still attached to her. The search was thorough, But frustratingly, no definitive physical evidence emerged that could lead them directly to the perpetrator. Despite this, Detective Hearne felt an instinctual pull towards certain details at the scene, perhaps the manner in which the log had been placed or the severed strands of hair, suggesting to her that this crime did not fit the mold of typical homicides. She speculated on a possible scenario with her colleagues, but without concrete evidence to back her hunch, it remained speculative. Night had enveloped the canyon when the remains of the young victim were finally transferred to the coroner's vehicle, destined for autopsy. The detectives were now tasked with one of the most challenging aspects of their duties, the notification of the next of kin. Given the evidence found with the body, they were prepared to confirm that the deceased was Missy Avila. It was time to deliver the harrowing news to her family. Upon the late evening arrival of Detectives Hearne and Patterson, Mrs. Avila's immediate reaction was one of dread, her body seized by a premonition as she opened the door. Inside, the detectives broke the news of the tragic finding with as much sensitivity as they could muster. Mrs. Avila's reaction was visceral, a mother's worst nightmare realized, as she screamed and struck out in anguish against Detective Patterson before collapsing to the floor, overcome by her loss. When Mrs. Avila was able to regain some level of composure, the detectives commenced a comprehensive inquiry with the family. They recounted the details of Missy's last known activities on Tuesday, including her departure with her friend, Laura Doyle. Through their questioning, the detectives established that Missy had been wearing additional items not recovered with her body, a gold chain and 5 rings, supplementing the details of her attire already noted by the crime scene investigators. The family provided a list of Missy's friends to the detectives, with particular attention given to any boys she may have been involved with romantically. This allowed the investigators to construct a comprehensive overview of Missy's social interactions and activities leading up to her disappearance. Laura Doyle, one of Missy's closest friends for approximately 5 years, became a primary person of interest for the detectives to interview. Laura, who was significantly taller and heavier than Missy, at 5 feet 5 inches and 135 pounds, recounted her actions to the detectives. She explained that she had driven Missy to the park and left her there conversing with 2 men by a blue Camaro. Upon her return, she insisted, both Missy and the men had vanished. While the information about the blue Camaro was scant, it provided a direction for the investigators. They initiated a comprehensive search to identify anyone who owned a blue Camaro and might have been present in or around Brantford Park on the day Missy disappeared. On the 6th of October, 1985, Dr. Eva Heuser, a seasoned deputy medical examiner with the Los Angeles County Coroner's Office, undertook the autopsy of Missy Avila. Dr. Heuser documented the victim's stature, noting she was 5 feet tall -2 inches and weighed 97 pounds. The examination revealed multiple abrasions and contusions on the girl's facial area, including around her eyes, the tip of her nose, and her mouth. These injuries were assessed to have occurred in close proximity to the time of death, some just before and others potentially post-mortem. The autopsy also brought to light bruises on the girl's left arm and hand, which were characterized as possible defensive wounds, commonly sustained while attempting to deflect blows or stave off an assault with a blunt object or a sharp weapon. The medical examiner determined the cause of death to be asphyxiation by drowning. The hair clumps found at the crime scene, which Detective Hearne had carefully preserved, underwent microscopic analysis by James G. Bailey, a criminalist at the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Office. Bailey concluded that the hair sample's characteristics were consistent with the hair from the victim, noting no significant differences. This finding corroborated the physical evidence observed at the scene with the victim's body. The criminalist's observation that the hair had been partly cut and partly torn suggested the use of a dull instrument, possibly a knife, in the act of cutting the victim's hair. This detail provided a specific characteristic of the violence inflicted upon Missy Avila and potentially offered insight into the circumstances surrounding her death. As the community mourned, funeral services for Missy Avila were conducted on Wednesday, October 9th. Amid the grieving, Missy's mother, overwhelmed by sorrow as she readied herself for her daughter's funeral, was visited by Karen Severson. At 18 years old and having been friends with Missy for a decade, Karen was significantly taller and heavier than Missy. She offered words of consolation to Mrs. Avila, vowing to be a pillar of support in the absence of her daughter. "I'm going to stick by you and stay with you now that Missy is gone. I'm going to be there for you." On the day of the funeral, Mrs. Avila received a poignant card from Laura Doyle, the last person known to have been with Missy. The card contained a heartfelt message of condolence and support, along with a $20 bill, expressing Laura's sympathy and her offer of assistance. "I know there's nothing anyone can say or do to make you feel better, but I am gonna try. I'm sorry she's gone. But she's not really gone. She's right here with all of us, although we can't see her. I thought you could use some money. I know $20 isn't much, but here it is and I hope it helps. If there is anything you need, please give me a call. I am right here for you. You are Missy's mom and mine, too. Please call me. I am sorry it happened to Missy and not someone else that deserved it. All my love, Laura." This gesture, while possibly well-intentioned, carried with it a haunting sentiment, as Laura expressed remorse that the tragedy had befallen Missy rather than someone else that deserved it, a statement that could evoke a range of emotions and questions during such a sensitive time. Mrs. Avila was touched by the kindness of her daughter's friends during such a devastating time, the $20 bill serving as a small but meaningful token of their care and connection to Missy. As the bereaved mother found solace in the support of her daughter's friends, detectives Hearne and Patterson pursued their investigation relentlessly. They delved into the lives of Missy's friends and acquaintances, leaving no stone unturned. Their inquiry led them into the murky depths of the local drug scene after learning of an individual connected to Missy who was involved in narcotics. The detectives' pursuit of leads took them all the way to the county jail, where a potential suspect was found to have an irrefutable alibi. He had been incarcerated before the crime was committed. The investigation also uncovered an owner of a blue Camaro within Missy's social network. However, this person was cleared when his alibi checked out. Each lead seemed to only culminate in further disappointment and frustration for the detectives. During this period of investigation, Karen Severson became an even more integral part of the Avila family. After a falling out with her roommate, Eva Kairumbolo, Karen moved in with Mrs. Avila, offering her presence as a source of comfort and solidarity. Eva herself would later relocate to Las Vegas to take up a temporary position as a wrestler. Karen's involvement with the Avila family was not merely as a supportive friend. She expressed a vehement desire for justice, echoing the family's grief and outrage. She took a proactive stance, saying to the Avila family, "We've got to try on our own to find out who did this to her. We've got to catch the animal who did this to Missy." Her passionate commitment to finding the perpetrator suggested a personal drive that went beyond mere friendship. Karen Severson's fixation on the murder was evident through her consistent engagement with the detectives, frequently reaching out to them for updates and offering her thoughts on the case. She kept a newspaper article about the murder with her, a constant reminder of the unresolved crime and the location where it took place. A month after the tragedy, Karen, while at Mrs. Avila's home with a group of friends, initiated an impromptu expedition to the crime scene. Their evening visit to Wickiup Creek was thwarted by the darkness, rendering their efforts to uncover any new evidence fruitless. Undeterred by the previous night's unsuccessful venture, Karen rallied her friends the following morning for a second attempt to visit the scene. With a sense of urgency, they drove back to the area where Michelle Avila's life had been cruelly taken. After parking their cars, the group embarked on foot down the trail, the newspaper article in hand providing only a vague guide to the specific location of the grim discovery. They walked until they were parallel to the creek, but lacking precise details, they were left to wander the trail. Then, suddenly, a relative of Missy's who was part of the group stopped abruptly. This jolting halt suggests a significant moment, perhaps a discovery or a realization, amidst their search, a poignant reminder of the personal toll the crime had taken on those close to Missy Avila. The poignant discovery of Missy's name carved into the tree, coupled with the familiar stylization of the letter S in her name, struck a deep emotional chord with the victim's relative. The inscription bore witness to a young love, immortalized in the bark, "Missy loves Jim." Beneath this declaration of affection, the carvings revealed more connections, the year 85 and the names Victor and Karen, though Karen's name was followed by another that had been aggressively marred, making it unreadable. The group, absorbing the significance of these markings, understood the intricate web of relationships and past romances that these carvings represented. They were acutely aware of Karen Severson's recent breakup with Victor Amaya, a former boyfriend of Missy's, a relationship that ended amidst Karen's suspicions of lingering feelings between Victor and Missy. With the revelation of the tree carvings, a question hung in the air, posed to Karen, "Karen, have you ever been up here before?" Karen Severson's immediate denial of any prior visit to the location was emphatic. She deflected, suggesting Victor Amaya's habit of engraving her name on trees as the reason for the etchings found. Her subsequent accusation was unambiguous, pointing the finger at Victor for the heinous act against Missy. The return journey to Arleta was somber, filled with the haunting memory of Missy as a song from her funeral played. It was during this emotionally charged moment that Karen made a startling and extreme statement, "We have got to kill him." Back at Mrs. Avila's home, the tension escalated as Karen placed a call to Victor, with a relative of Missy secretly listening in. During the call, Victor acknowledged the tragedy of Missy's death, characterizing it as a shame. Karen then probed further, asking Victor about his familiarity with a location near Colby Canyon, a question loaded with the implication of his involvement and potentially seeking to elicit a self-incriminating response. Victor confirmed his previous visits to the mountainous area near Colby Canyon when Karen inquired, responding, "Yes. I don't know why you ask. I've been up in the mountains with you." Upon being asked if he ever carved her name into a tree, he admitted, "Yeah. We've carved our names in plenty of trees. You know that." Karen's questioning took a more accusatory tone as she linked the carving practice to the location of Missy's murder and Victor's alleged dislike for her. "Well, you know, that's right near where Missy was killed and you always hated her. You never liked her," she said. Victor was quick to defend himself against the sudden accusation. "Wait a minute," he retorted, "I have nothing to hide about Missy. I will go down to Foothill Division and make a statement right now." His response was immediate and firm, indicating his desire to transparently address any suspicions regarding his relationship with Missy. Karen ended the call with Victor, but her resolve against him had not diminished. The following day, she was on the move again, this time with another member of the Avila family. They visited a relative's house where Karen, without explanation, took a 1-gallon jug of pool acid from near the swimming pool and carried it to her car. That evening, Karen met with some of the young people who were part of the close-knit group mourning Missy's death. She passed the jug of acid to them, provided details about where Victor lived, described his appearance, his car, and implored them to pour the acid on him. Her plea escalated with a gruesome request for them to sever his finger and return it to her as proof of retribution for Missy's murder. A pair from the group embarked on the grave task but eventually returned unsuccessful, unable to locate Victor. Karen's frustration boiled over as she exclaimed, "I can't believe it. He is the one who did it. I can't believe it." Despite their suspicions and Karen's incitement, this vigilante plot was not disclosed to law enforcement. Detectives Hearne and Patterson remained immersed in their official investigation, inundated with the day-to-day grind of interviews, evidence collection, and the pursuit of new information. They were still following the lead of the blue Camaro, diligently questioning several owners of such vehicles in the quest for answers. Victor remained in Karen's crosshairs. She orchestrated a ruse by ensuring Victor received an invitation to a party that was nothing more than a trap. There, 4 of Karen's cohorts lay in wait. They confronted Victor outside the venue and inflicted a brutal beating upon him. Victor, opting against legal action, decided to leave the state instead. Karen appeared to derive some temporary satisfaction from this retribution. She maintained her stance that justice should be meted out to anyone involved in Missy's demise. In the interim, detectives Hearne and Patterson persisted in their investigation. However, with no fresh leads surfacing, they had to balance this case with other duties. Detective Hearne kept the victim's blue purse in her car's trunk as a tangible reminder of the unsolved case, pondering over any detail they might have missed. The Avila family faced a melancholy Thanksgiving, the first since Missy's murder. Karen Severson was there, joining them for the holiday meal, offering her presence as a source of comfort during a time shadowed by grief. In the lead-up to Christmas in 1985, the pain of loss was acute for Mrs. Avila, who continued to contact the police, reinforcing her desire for justice in her daughter's case. Amidst her persistent calls, she received a visit from Laura Doyle, the last person known to have seen Missy alive. Laura came to express her ongoing distress over the situation, conveying her feelings to Mrs. Avila. "I sure wish we could find who did it. I still feel very, very bad." Laura's visit and her words were a testament to the enduring impact Missy's death had on those who were close to her, a reflection of the shared grief still palpable months after the tragedy. As the new year of 1986 dawned, Karen Severson subtly began to suggest to Mrs. Avila that she suspected another young person from their community may possess information about Missy's murder. After some unsuccessful attempts to confront this individual, Karen, with Mrs. Avila in tow, finally managed to face him directly. Without preamble, Karen bluntly put forth the question, "Did you kill Missy?" she demanded. The youth, taken aback, vehemently denied the accusation. "No," he protested. "Why would I hurt her?" The conversation was charged with emotion, with Mrs. Avila, driven by a mix of hope and desperation, pleading for the truth. "Please," Mrs. Avila begged. "If you know anything, please tell me. I'm going crazy. I just want to know who killed my daughter." Despite the young man's protestations of ignorance and innocence, Karen aggressively insisted that he was not telling the truth, while Mrs. Avila, grasping for any shred of closure, pressed a photograph of Missy into his face, demanding he reconsider his stance. "Now, look at her and tell me you don't know anything." His response was one of adamant denial, tinged with the heightened emotion of the moment. "I swear to God," he yelled. "I swear to God I didn't do anything to her." The confrontation reached a crescendo with Mrs. Avila, overwhelmed by frustration and sorrow, physically lashing out at the young man. Following this intense encounter, both women departed, leaving Mrs. Avila to succumb to her grief, crying until exhaustion claimed her into sleep. This intense episode illustrates the raw, unyielding pain that Missy's unsolved case inflicted on her family and community. As the seasons changed and time progressed, Karen maintained her close relationship with Mrs. Avila, continually presenting her own speculations about the circumstances of Missy's murder. Together, they embarked on informal inquiries, a testament to their determination for answers. Karen's visits to Missy's grave were filled with tears and contemplation, and she began to voice doubts about Laura Doyle, suggesting that Laura might be withholding information. With the passage of an additional 2 months, Karen transitioned to living independently in her own apartment. However, this change in residence did not diminish her intense engagement with the Avila family or her commitment to uncovering the truth behind Missy's tragic death. In a continued effort to connect with the past events, Karen orchestrated another visit to the site of Missy's murder in mid-June of 1986. She, along with 2 other women and 3 men, drove to the canyon only to discover a film crew setting up for a production. There, they encountered the same forest ranger who had been present during the initial investigation, overseeing the film set's perimeter. When the ranger overheard Karen discussing the murder with her friends, pinpointing the location as near the film set, he inquired about the status of the case. Karen's response was succinct, "Not yet," indicating that the killer remained at large. The ranger, perhaps sensing the weight of the situation or acting out of protocol, noted the details of Karen's group, the number of individuals, the car they arrived in, and its license plate. This attention to detail could have been routine, or perhaps it was driven by an inkling that this information might later prove to be of significance. Mrs. Avila, alongside Karen, persisted in their unofficial investigation, clinging to any thread that might unravel the mystery of Missy's death. Meanwhile, the official investigation continued under Detectives Hearne and Patterson, following any leads, however tenuous. With the retirement of Lieutenant Charles Elliott in 1986, the case transitioned fully into their hands. Yet, another year passed without a breakthrough. In May of 1987, Mrs. Avila inquired about her daughter's missing jewelry. Upon learning that it had not been recovered, she offered to provide sketches to aid the police. Karen also contributed her own renditions of the jewelry, but despite these additional efforts, the items remained unaccounted for. As the second anniversary of Missy's murder approached, the absence of progress was palpable. During this period of mounting frustration, Karen visited Mrs. Avila with the claim of possessing significant new information. She alleged that Laura Doyle, who had initially claimed to have left Missy at Branford Park, had a confession to make. Karen brought Laura directly to Mrs. Avila's home, where Laura recanted her previous statement. "The story I told you about leaving Missy at Branford Park was a lie. I really dropped her off at Grace Community Church." The weight of this revelation hung in the air, prompting the question of whether Laura would be willing to share this new account with the authorities. "Would you be willing to tell the police what you just said?" Laura's affirmative response to recount her story to the police offered a glimmer of hope. Prompted by Laura Doyle's sudden willingness to revise her testimony, Mrs. Avila contacted Detective Patterson, who arranged a late-night meeting at his office. When Laura was initially interviewed separately by Detective Patterson, she hesitated to disclose her new account. After Karen spoke with her privately for a substantial period, they emerged with Karen assuring, "I finally got the truth out of her." In front of Detective Patterson and the 2 women, Laura presented a startlingly different narrative. "I left Missy off at Grace Community Church because she owed this guy named Eddie Suber $500 for fronting her coke money, so that's where I dropped her off." The detective found the claim of Missy's involvement with cocaine dubious, as there had been no prior indication of her using drugs, and the autopsy had not shown any traces of narcotics. Aware, however, that drug use was not uncommon in the broader social network around Missy, he encouraged Laura to elaborate. Laura continued with a harrowing account. "About 2 days later, Eddie Suber followed me and made me stop on a side street, made me stay in the car. He got out of his car, came up to my side door, and showed me a gun. He told me that I'd better stick to the park story or the same thing would happen to me that happened to Missy." With Laura's startling new claims, Detective Patterson committed to an intensive search for the elusive Eddie Suber, fueling a sense of victory in Karen, who felt validated by her role in uncovering what seemed like a significant lead. However, the quest to locate Eddie Suber proved fruitless. The investigation team's efforts to find him or even verify his existence led nowhere, adding to the frustration of a case that was already riddled with dead ends. The narrative took another turn in July 1988 when Eva Kairumbalo, who had previously lived with Karen, returned to California after a period working as a wrestler in Las Vegas. The recent suicide of a young relative left Eva in a state of profound grief, a feeling that resonated with the anguish experienced by Missy Avila's family. Compelled by her own sorrow and perhaps a sense of shared pain, Eva decided to reach out to the authorities. On the 26th of July, Detective Hearne received an urgent phone call from Eva, who claimed to have critical information. Hearne immediately went to Eva's residence, where she found Eva, her boyfriend, and a family member in a visibly shaken state. Eva confessed to Hearne, "I'm in trouble because I was there and I knew what happened and I didn't tell anybody." Eva now wanted to tell the true story of Missy Avila's murder. Detective Hearne would recall the intensity of her anticipation. "I thought my heart was going to leap out of my skin." For nearly 3 years since the death of Missy, the truth had eluded Hearne and the rest of the investigation team. Now, the moment had come when she would finally learn who was responsible for the young girl's murder. Eva's confession pointed directly to Karen Severson and Laura Doyle, Missy's own friends, as the culprits, driven by a dark strand of jealousy. She explained their motive with clarity. They accused Missy of having sex with their boyfriends. Detective Hearne had developed a hypothesis at the crime scene, informed by the unique and personal nature of the attack on Missy. Her theory considered the lack of violent assault typically seen in murders committed by men. Attractive young women who are murdered by men are, more often than not, physically or sexually assaulted. Instead, Missy had been subjected to a different form of violence that was deeply personal and degrading. Her hair had been cut off in clumps, an act of humiliation that Hearne felt suggested a female perpetrator, but the humiliation Missy Avila had suffered by having her hair ruined told Detective Hearne that the murder may have been committed by a woman. A vengeful woman. Furthermore, the log placed on Missy's shoulders indicated that more than one person was involved in the crime, supporting the theory that Hearne had considered from the beginning. Her instincts had been correct. What's more, the placement of the heavy log upon the victim's shoulders suggested at least 2 perpetrators. Hearne's persistence and intuition had been key in keeping the investigation open to this possibility, which was now seemingly confirmed by Eva's testimony. Eva unraveled the events of October 1, 1985, shedding light on the circumstances that led to Missy Avila's tragic end. Eva recounted that day, detailing how Karen Severson and Laura Doyle orchestrated a ruse that led them into the mountains. Eva described the initial encounter, saying, "I was driving with Karen Severson when they pulled up next to Laura Doyle's red Volkswagen, in which Laura and Missy were sitting. The pretense of an argument between Karen and Laura was the bait that led Missy into their trap." Eva continued, recounting how they chased each other's vehicles to a remote area before stopping to talk. After the brief conversation, they resumed their journey to the trailhead parking lot. According to Eva, during the drive, Karen revealed the true motive behind their plot: "We're going to scare Missy because she had been promiscuous with our boyfriends." At the parking lot, Karen and Laura's mock fight escalated, then abruptly pivoted towards Missy. Overcome with emotion, Missy cried as she was berated with accusations. Eva remembered Laura's pivotal instruction to Missy, saying, after bombarding Missy with a tirade of accusations about boys they thought she had slept with, Laura said, "Let's take a walk." Confronted with the anger of her friends, Missy responded with a plea for mercy, "Why don't you just leave me here? The worst thing you guys can do is just leave me here." But Laura was unrelenting, seizing Missy by the wrist and compelling her to follow. "Let's go." The group of 4, whom Missy had considered friends, bypassed the barriers and made their way down the trail to the stream's edge. Eva recounted to Detective Hearne that once they arrived at the stream, Missy, overwhelmed by emotion, sat down on a large rock, weeping. Karen and Laura continued their verbal assault, hurling accusations at Missy while Eva stood by, a silent observer to the unfolding cruelty. Detective Hearne, seeking to understand the extent of the humiliation inflicted upon Missy, inquired, "Can you remember if they did anything to degrade or humiliate Missy?" Eva's response was brief but chilling: "They cut her hair." Hearne pressed further for details. "Do you know what they used to cut her hair?" Eva confirmed the instrument of the act, a knife. Eva detailed the moment Laura moved aggressively towards Missy, berating her for alleged indiscretions with a boy, and seized her hair. Although Eva's gaze was cast down, the sight of Missy's hair falling to the ground was unmistakable. She could not definitively say whether Karen or Laura had done the cutting, or if they both had, but one detail was clear: Eva had seen a knife in Karen's possession. Detective Hearne's professional intuition had been alert to the possibility of a breakthrough, and Eva's specific mention of Missy's hair being cut struck a profound chord. Such details were often withheld from the public precisely to verify the credibility of confessions or witness statements. With this critical piece of undisclosed evidence being brought forth by Eva, Detective Hearne felt a rush of vindication. Eva's account had the ring of truth. Eva then recounted the moments that followed the cruel shearing of Missy's hair. She described how Laura Doyle had enticed Missy into the stream with a deceptive calm. "Come out here, Missy. The water isn't so deep," Laura had said, creating a false sense of safety. Following Laura's coaxing, Karen seized the opportunity to escalate the situation. Missy, still seated and undoubtedly confused and fearful, was pulled to her feet by Karen and led towards the water. Laura then took control, clasping Missy's right wrist and drawing her deeper into the stream, with Karen in tow. Eva, witnessing the escalation of aggression and sensing the impending danger, was overcome with fear. That's when I got nervous and started running up the path. I was scared. I didn't like what I was seeing." She fled the scene, driven by instinct and terror, only to be haunted by Missy's scream that pierced the air as she reached the safety of the barricade. "By the time I got to the barricade, I heard Missy scream." Eva's retreat ended at the parked cars, where she succumbed to the overwhelming horror of what she had been a part of. "I got to the cars and sat down between them. I just sat there and cried." Detective Hearne was met with mixed emotions upon hearing Eva's account. The revelation that Eva was an eyewitness to the aftermath, rather than the murder itself, meant that the case against the perpetrators now hinged on less concrete, circumstantial evidence. Despite this setback, Eva's narrative was crucial, providing a first-hand perspective on the events following Missy's murder. Eva recounted the moments after the crime, describing Karen's return to the parking lot. Karen's vague admission to Eva suggested an attempt to conceal the crime. "I don't remember her exact words, but she said that she had to hide or cover the body. Then she got in her car and took off and left me there." Eva's memory then focused on Laura's frantic actions. Laura emerged from the trail, disposed of her wet shoes, and began to tear off the car's seat covers, a clear sign of her attempt to eradicate any evidence. She was just panicking, going crazy. Their departure from the crime scene was chaotic, with Laura at the wheel, driving recklessly back to Arleta. Detective Hearne sought to understand Laura's state of mind during the drive. "Did Laura say anything?" she asked Eva. Eva revealed a chilling response. "She was laughing, like an evil laugh," she recalled. "She was saying, 'Ha, ha, ha, I killed Missy. My God, I killed Missy.'" With this disturbing confession, Detective Hearne knew they had reached a critical juncture. She reached out to Detective Patterson to share what she had learned. They both concurred that while it was not necessary to detain Eva, there was now ample justification to proceed with the arrests of Karen Severson and Laura Doyle for their roles in the heinous act against Missy. The legal system began its methodical process after Karen Severson and Laura Doyle were ordered to stand trial for the murder of Missy Avila. The typically slow-moving wheels of justice turned even more ponderously as the case developed. It was in August 1989 that Deputy District Attorney Tamia Hope of Los Angeles County took charge of the prosecution. She scheduled a brief respite before diving into the case. However, during her vacation, she stumbled upon a shocking coincidence in a national magazine. "My God. That's my case!" Hope was faced with a detailed account of the very crime she was about to prosecute, complete with a photo spread and narrative that outlined the charges against Karen and Laura. Victor Amaya, a significant figure from the past entangled in the tumultuous relationships surrounding Missy, was in Seattle when he encountered the same magazine article. The revelation that Karen, who had vehemently sought justice for Missy's murder and even orchestrated an attack on him, was now a defendant, stunned him. Once the initial shock wore off, he reached out to DA Hope, ready to contribute his knowledge of Karen's animosity towards Missy. "I can tell you a lot about how Karen felt about Missy." Victor also disclosed that Karen had taken him to the murder scene before the crime, where she insisted on altering the carved names on the tree, an act that spoke to her jealousy and possessiveness. With the case relying heavily on circumstantial evidence, DA Hope faced a challenging trial. Yet, she secured a strategic win by convincing the court to try Karen and Laura together, believing that this would underscore the joint envy they harbored towards Missy. The trial took place in January 1990. DA Hope built her argument around Eva Kairumbolo's testimony and the circumstantial evidence pointing to a premeditated murder. She detailed how the act required two assailants, one to submerge Missy's face and the other to restrain her legs, along with the two-person effort needed to place the log on Missy's back. The verdict on January 31st was guilty of second-degree murder for both Karen and Laura. Judge Jack B. So, on March 9th, imposed the maximum sentence of 15 years to life, citing the cruelty and viciousness of the crime, among other factors. Karen Severson was released on December 9, 2011, after serving over 23 years, and Laura Doyle was released in December 2012, after 22 years in prison. Throughout, Mrs. Irene Avila remained steadfast in her opposition to any early release for the convicted, forever holding on to Missy's final words to her, "I love you, Mom." In a symbolic act of retribution, another family member returned to the site of Missy's death. With a large knife, he erased Karen's name from the alder tree, rectifying the injustice that had marred it since Missy's murder. Thank you for joining us through the twists and turns of this harrowing story. Until next time, keep seeking answers in the shadows, and remember, behind every headline lies a lesson waiting to be learned. Don't forget to leave a short comment and hit the like button.